post-holiday hair and I stayed up until 2 every night this week, dark circles. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joanna Holden, and I'm a Christian author and vlogger. And today I'm going to be doing a video I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is how to make a series notebook or series Bible, depending on what you call it. So yes, I did a video. My very first vlog actually was a video of me putting together the Co-Sunder series notebook, and that was like back in, I want to say like June maybe. It was way back at the beginning of summer, whenever it was. And I've been dying to do this one ever since, because I actually have had people ask me since then, like, what do you put in a series notebook? And like, what are all the many different kinds of things you can put in, and how do you organize it best, and things like that. So today I'm doing a video to cover all of those questions, how to do your own series notebook. Let's start off with why, though, real quickly, just in case, you're watching this video to find out why. Why would you need a series notebook? If anytime you have a very complex story, you have to have a designated place to keep all of the notes for the various characters, for the various subplots, and to kind of look over your outline and your timeline notes. Otherwise, it's scattered everywhere, and as a result, your story can end up scattered everywhere all over the manuscript, because you don't have you don't know where to go and find stuff. If you're like in the middle of drafting and you're like, oh crap, I forgot this, you don't know where to find it. When you have a series, it makes it that much more complex, because you have different storylines, you have maybe new characters, and depending on the kind of series you're writing, it may be more complex or less complex, and the stories may be more tied together or less tied together. But either way, when you're dealing with that many books, anywhere from 2 and up, you're going to want to have one place where you know where everything is, so that when you do have a question, or if you're in the middle of outlining, you want to make sure that you remember all the wonderful scenes you thought of, you know where they are. So it keeps everything in one place, easy to get to, already organized, and then that takes so much stress off during outlining and during drafting, and then during the rewriting phases. It's just so great for that. So that's the why. Now we'll get on to the how. And real quickly, just as a side note, there is no wrong time to start making your notebook. And as evidenced by me, you can make it and you continuously update it, as you come up with new information. Okay, down to the meat of things. What can you put in your series notebook, and how do you organize it? So I basically have 4 categories that I use for my series notebook. I keep series notes, which covers the breadth of the entire series. And then I have my characters section, which is going to cover all the characters from A to Z, book 1 to book 25. It's going to have all my characters and all of their stuff. It's going to have world building, and this may be more important or less important depending on if you're doing a fantasy or a science fiction, or like a historical fiction, or like a contemporary fiction set in a small town in Kansas. Depending on the need of your story, you may have to do more of this, but regardless, you're going to have to do world building. So you still have to have this section no matter what you're making. And then, of course, fourthly, and I wasn't sure how to phrase this when I came up with the sections, so I just called it plot development. And basically, this is all of the super duper in-depth brainstorming, plot development, and outlines that I have for each book. Each book has its own section that is just full of every single little piece of information or of possible ideas or whatever in a section. So while the series notes section at the beginning is just kind of an overview of everything and how all the stories tie together, the plot development section is, this book has every single detail of what's in this, and then this one has a section, and then this one, and so on and so forth. So what goes into each section? Okay, so for the series notes section, so there's going to be the basic things that go in here are summaries, connecting timelines, and themes and symbols. But I have a lot more of individuals. And this is just ideas. Like, if you don't want to do all of these, or you have even more ideas that you want to include, go for it. Like, this is not what you have to put in or cannot put in. This is just ideas of what I'm putting in mind, so to kind of help you get some, just to get you started. Just to help you get started. So the first thing I put in is the individual book titles and summaries. So a list of the titles of the books as I have them, working titles, and then a short 1-page summary of what happens in each book. so that I could just have like an at-a-glance look at what's happening in the storyline. Then I have overarching main thread summary, which is basically the main purpose of the entire series, like the main plot that runs through the whole story. You take away all the subplots, you take away all the, extra character development that's not needed. Just what is the main point through the series? Like, what is it that connects them all together? Then we have individual book character arcs under series length character arcs. What? Individual book character arcs under... Oh, okay. So I have individual book character arcs, and then I have character arcs that span the series. So for each character, I'm going to have a map, and I don't have them written out yet. Let's just take this sheet of paper. Okay, so on the bottom, I'm going to have, okay, this is the character arc from A to Z across the entire series. And then these are the character developments in each book. So I have it again, it's an at a glance. The whole purpose of this section is at a glance. Next, you're going to have connecting timelines between the subplots. So you have your main plot going through the whole series and each individual book. Now, how about the subplots? Because the more characters you have, the more subplots you're going to have. And the more subplots you have, the more organization you want for keeping track of them. So I have, depending on how many books you have, you're going to have characters that show up in book 1 that go all the way to the end of the series. You have characters that show up in book 1 that are only going to make it through to book 3. You have characters that show up in book 2 that'll be there to book 5, book 3 that'll be there to book 10, and so on and so forth. So their subplots and like how they interact, how the subplots affect each other and affect the main story over the course of those books, you want to have that like mapped out, like physically mapped, like actually drawn, so that you can see how they interweave, how they connect, where they connect, and in which books, so that as you're going through and outlining your books, you know, okay, I need to make sure that I include this subplot here and this subplot here. You also want to make sure that, and this one can be included in your characters too, but I like to include this in the series notes because, again, this is your at-a-glance for the whole thing, is a character roster for each book, and then a character roster for the entire series. So basically, I like to have a page for each book, and then I have the characters that are mentioned listed from the main characters all the way to the extras, and then a number of asterisks afterward to show how important they are to the story. So obviously the main character is going to have the most, and then the sub, and the love interest, and then the villain, and then, the parents, or the boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend, whatever, it's going to slowly do this with each character till you get to the characters that are only mentioned a couple of times, and they're more like, they're just kind of there. The important thing for doing this in the series section is that you can look and see how many times in each book, like what importance this character is. And if you have too many characters, then you can just look at that at a glance across the series and say, okay, this character has been a 1-star character through the entire thing. I don't need an extra character with an extra name, so we're getting rid of this person and we'll just have a nameless crony do it. Or, this person is super important in book 1 and then isn't important again until book 5. We need to somehow either make them relevant in the middle time or just take them out completely because it's not making sense. You can see that, you can physically see it, again, at a glance. So that helps with a lot of outlining tips for when you're trying to figure out characters. Next, you're going to have series themes and symbols, like, again, overarching series versus the individual book themes. So each book is going to kind of have a theme, like what its purpose is, and then you're going to have a theme for the entire series. Then you're going to have your series progression aesthetic. This is something, and I'm going to do a whole video on aesthetics that I think I may do next, I'm not sure. But basically, we all know aesthetics. They are, a collage of stock photos or artwork that just kind of give you a feel for a character, a place, or a plot line. And when you're talking about a series progression aesthetic, it's basically how the world develops, how the characters develop, through aesthetics. But each book is going to have a feel, and it's going to have that theme. And so if you make an aesthetic for each book that represents the feel of it, the theme of it, kind of like the emotional connection it's supposed to have with the reader, whether lighter, funnier, darker, romantic, super action-packed, that way it's an at-a-glance physical look that you can get a physical feel for how the book is supposed to come across emotionally to the audience, which can really help when you're plotting and as you're going back through and rewrites especially. And lastly, something that I just discovered recently that has put me light years ahead of myself as far as inspiration are mock book covers. You do this by taking a stock photo that you really, really like, that you feel like encapsulates your story, and or maybe you do your own artwork or something, whatever, and you put it on, like, again, canva.com is amazing, I'll link it below, but you just put it on a book cover format, and you slap a title, your working title across, so you make it look like a real book cover, and then, like, you save it to a file, and you have that up as your wallpaper, or you print it off and you put it up on your vision board. I like to do this with the entire series. It's very similar to the series progression aesthetic in that it gives you a feel for what the series is going to look like. It helps me that there is an end in sight. Here's a potential, book cover that could be on it someday. This is going to help me figure it out. So that's what I have for the series notes section. Okay, so the second section is pretty basic. It's your character section. So anything that you have written up that would go with any character that you have in your series goes in this section. I include quite a few different things for characters, but really anything you have for characters can go here. And then I just organize it by importance. So the main character is the first person in the section, then the sidekick or the love interest, and then the villain, and then so on and so forth, all the way down to the least important characters at the end. But I do include all their information. Some things that you can include in this are individual character profiles that include the following. So things that I include in each character profile are a character progression aesthetic with phrases defining personality. Again, I'll do more on this in my video on aesthetics that is coming, but a character progression aesthetic is basically 3 aesthetics per book that define how the character grows. So you start off with lighting and pictures and a phrase that the character says at the beginning of the book, whether he actually says it in the book or not, or she, that kind of define how they start off the book. Then you have their midpoint, that dark spot where they're realizing that they have to change. You have pictures, and the lighting is usually different, the colors are sometimes different, and then a phrase that defines their frustrations and their realization for need for change. And then the last one is as they're heading into that final battle and they don't know if they'll leave alive or not, or if they'll be scarred from it or whatever. There's a phrase, defining their determination and what they have to risk and why they're willing to do it. And then some pictures that kind of show that they've changed. Other things you can do are celebrity lookalikes, artwork, wardrobe, accessories, weapons, anything that you can draw or find good stock photos of that remind you of your character or that are things that would help you visualize them better. Put it in there, print them off, put them in there, or have them on a digital file somewhere. Character summary, so basically like a narrative style writing. I usually do 1 page that I answer the questions in a questionnaire on 1 page, and then I translate it into a narrative that describes their character a little bit more like a storyteller. It helps me get inside their head a little bit better. Character arcs and descriptions, so like the description of their arc, where they start, where they end, and the journey that gets them there. Personality tests, so whatever personality test you would choose that would show their values, their motivations, their fears. This is going to be hugely helpful, and you want to include that in there. Print it off and include that in there so that you have it to reference. And then something that I've just started doing more recently is a voice analysis, which is basically, it's your description of how your characters talk. So for instance, I have a character, a female character, who is very fun-loving and outspoken and borderline aggressive sometimes in how she can come across to people. So how I translate that into her dialogue is she uses a lot of sarcasm. Her lines are usually very blunt. She's not super graceful with how she talks always. She asks a lot of quippy questions and she uses a lot of wit. So I include that kind of stuff in her lines of dialogue. And what this does is voice analysis, is it really shows the contrast between characters just through their dialogue, so that as a reader, as you're sitting there reading it through, in your head, you're hearing the different voices of the different characters, and you can easily differentiate them from each other instead of sitting there and they just kind of all sound alike. I like to have these set like in 1 page where you can see how all of them talk. so that as you're going through a dialogue section with multiple characters talking at the same time, well, not at the same time, but in the same conversation, then you can just sit there and look at your analysis and see how all of them would respond differently to the questions. It's a big help. It is so insightful into their personalities, and it helps it translate into dialogue so much smoother. Okay, section number 3, we're moving on here, is world building. Yay! World building is actually one of my very favorite parts of the entire process. However, it can be the longest and the hardest to deal with, so when you have one place where all your information is stored, it helps because then you're not repeating research and having to scrounge around looking to remember, did I include this, or how does this go? Having it all in one place helps a lot, especially with like fantasy or science fiction where you've built entire worlds and entire civilizations and whole government structures and religious systems and all this different stuff. So you'll want to include maps. This is one of the first things that I do because your terrain and where your characters are geographically is going to affect some elements of the story, of the culture, obviously, and then, of course, the setting is going to be important to you to know. So I start off with maps of the entire world, and then down to just their continent, and then down to their country or territory, and then I really need to actually do a detailed map of the main city where most of the action takes place in the story. If you need to go even more detailed, like if there's a very important and large house or like academy or something like that in your story, you may want to map that out as well. I may have to do this too. I try to make sure that I have the history of the world, how each people group got to where they are, what they value as a culture and as a civilization, all that fun stuff about history. The current social or diplomatic international relationships, what's going on inside each nation or people group, and then how they're related to each other outside of that. Your race or people group or species forms where you list and detail these different kinds of creatures that you're making that are sentient, that can speak and that have intelligence and that communicate to the world, and then a list of all of your creatures. This one is applicable mostly to fantasy and science fiction, but if you have special creatures in your world, non-sentient, then you need to go ahead and list those as well. And I like to include pictures of these. And then lastly, we're down to the end, guys, yay! The last section is number 4, plot development. And remember, this one is where you have a slot for each individual book and you go into as much detail as possible. So some things that you can include in this are title ideas, aesthetics and artwork, mock book covers, which you had in the series section, but you can include those here too. Like you can do a variety of mock book covers for each book here to kind of see what you like the best. Your outlines and your scene ideas, your brainstorming stuff, and then your current edit notes. So as you're going through your novel, as you're doing your first draft and then your second draft, whatever draft you're on, you always have some kind of edit notes. You want to have one place where they all go. Which I need right now because I have like a gajillion edit notes that are scattered everywhere that I need to organize. So organize those, that helps, and you can keep those there. Okay guys, well that's all that I have for you today. I am going to be doing several videos actually as a follow-up to this. I realized that as I'm talking about all these different things, I'm like, these are all things I really want to talk about more in depth. So I'm going to do several more videos as a follow-up detailing some of these things. Obviously, I'm doing the one about aesthetics. I'm going to do one about that and include some visuals. I'm going to do one on world building. I want to do a whole series on that. And I do want to do one on how to plan a series. So that's all that I have for you guys today. If you like this content, then please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing on the way out. This is the kind of content that I post regularly. Writing advice, my writing journal, it's all here. And again, as you've noticed, there's going to be a lot of fun videos coming soon, so if you want to get them as soon as they pop up, then hit the little bell guy and he'll notify you as soon as they come. You can go to my website, joannaholden.com, to find out more about me, my books, and the services I offer, the critique services. There's also a newsletter there. I send out a monthly newsletter in addition to other newsletters as release information comes out. But the basic newsletter is really great. It has writer resources, it has a writer's toolbox, it has some fun, quirky kind of writer stuff that shows up every month, and it's just a great place to find the writer resources that sometimes we miss. I am on social media on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest, and all the links are in the description box below. Love you all, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!